We made it to day 3. Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel, or thanks for joining us if you're new here. My name is Maddie, and this is part 3 of my review of the Canada Reads books leading up to the competition, which starts next Monday, the 28th. For those of you who don't know, Canada Reads is Canada's annual title fight, and 5 Canadian books are defended by 5 Canadian celebrities. Each day they debate the merits of the book. This year the theme is one book to connect us all. At the end of the day they vote off a book to go home, and they keep doing until there's one book left, and that book is crowned the one book that all of Canada should read. So I have been reading and reviewing them all, and today we are going to talk about What Strange Paradise, which is by Omar El-Akkad. The premise of this book is more bodies have washed up on the shore of a small island. Another overfilled, ill-equipped, dilapidated ship has sunken under the weight of its too many passengers. Syrians, Ethiopians, Egyptians, Lebanese, Palestinians, all of them desperate to escape untenable lives back in their homelands. But miraculously, someone has survived the passage. 9-year-old Amir, a Syrian boy who is soon rescued by Vanna. Vanna is a teenage girl who, despite being native to the island, experiences her own sense of homelessness in a place among people she has come to disdain. And through Vanna and Amir are complete strangers, though they don't speak a common language. Vanna is determined to do whatever it takes to save the boy. So to dive a little bit more into the plot, the way that this story is told is it focuses on alternating chapters that go from before, that capture Amir's life before, like what happened to have his family flee and how he ended up coming on the boat, and then his journey on the boat to the island of Kos, which is an island just like off of Greece, and after, which starts with him waking up on the beach, and then catalog him meeting Vanna and then them trying to find a way to get him safely off the island because there are better resources in the mainland. If he ends up in the refugee program there, he'll just kind of be stuck and the conditions are really poor and they don't have the resources that they need. And while all of this is happening, the soldiers on the island are trying to find them to take the kid and bring him back to the like official program there that he's technically supposed to be a part of, because they're kind of smuggling him into being a part of this other program. So that is the plot. The characters are where I struggle, because I feel like this book is, I didn't connect with anything. Like, it was trying to do too much at once. Like, it wasn't that I didn't connect with anything, but I wasn't like following the characters, and like thematically, ideology wise, it was trying to do so much that it was very difficult to try and focus on both. So the characters that we have in this book are Vanna, obviously, who is a teenage girl. This is a thing that I struggle with in books sometimes, and I don't quite know if it makes sense or not. So Vanna's parents are fighting with each other constantly. She thinks that they're gonna get divorced, or that they should get divorced, and they hate the migrants who are coming in. They actually at one point end up turning in a couple that they find, but Vanna is not, and we're never really given context for that. And I think that's what I find difficult, like when a whole book or community centers on like racism or something like that, and then there's one character that like magically doesn't have the ideologies of the system that they were raised in. I think I just find having a hard time wrapping my head around that. Like, I want to know, was it online media? Was it this teacher that she has who is the one who asks her to take Amir? Like, what is it that allowed her to set that aside? Because like there's this sense of like resentment in her, but like we also don't really understand where that comes from. I feel like I don't know much about her. I couldn't really tell you how old she was, whether she has friends, what she's doing in school, like any of her hobbies or interests. And then we have Amir, who I know a little bit more about, and Amir flees Syria with his mother, his uncle, and his half-brother, or I think his half-brother is born while they're fleeing, and they end up in Egypt. And one night his uncle sneaks out and Amir follows him and finds out that his uncle has paid for passage on this boat, and through a series of accidents Amir ends up on the boat as well. I did find that because there's so much about the other passengers on the boat, I think to try and give us this idea that, you know, everyone is struggling and that there's like this shared experience of like hope for something better and like trying to get away, that sometimes we didn't even get that much about Amir. There were certain things about him that I still also feel like I don't know much about, but I was trying to like follow and keep track of throughout the course of the novel. Even his family and things like that. Like, I feel like I don't know much about his mom and his relationship with his mom, and what he's feeling and what he's going through on the island is difficult, and so much of that is because of the language barrier, and I don't know if that's intentional or not, but it made it very hard for me to ground myself in the characters. The character that I really want to talk about, who I didn't understand the most, is the like head of this group of soldiers, which is Colonel Kithros. One of the things that I didn't like about this book is the way that it wrote the military, which I will touch on later on, but Colonel Kithros' character is so jaded and cynical, and I don't understand why. It's implied by the book that I'm pretty sure it's meant to be Rwanda that he served at, because he makes this comment about like a form of torture being having to like watch a genocide occur and like not be able to do anything. So obviously like that is gonna have a huge impact on you, and that whole peacekeeping mission failed miserably and ended up horribly impacting the people who were peacekeepers, as well as not being able to intervene and help the people they were supposed to be there to help. But I don't understand why that like gives Colonel Kithros this idea of like their problems should stay their problems and our problems should stay our problems. Like it's not really clear. Like he lost his leg. It seems to be kind of implied that like the bomb that blew up was put there by local people. He seems to have this like idea of what it means to be in the military. He assaults someone's parent after their child almost drowns, and this person is not a migrant. And then also at one point in the book like picks up a child and whips him to the floor. And like, I don't understand where that kind of violence came from. Like, I just feel like we need context for where he is. One, I think it's a really narrow and flat portrayal of a veteran with PTSD, which I think is problematic in its own right. And two, I don't think it like aligns with his character, and I don't have enough narrative to be like, okay, this behavior makes sense with what I know about this character. Yeah, I feel like they try to use Colonel Kithros as like the face of like the structural issues within the military, and they completely fail to do that. And I just found myself like, he felt cartoonish in his anger, and it didn't feel real at all. And I was like, what is happening? Everything he was doing, I was like, I don't understand. Also, towards the end of the book, he could speak, they never tell you what Ymir speaks. I don't know what they speak in Syria. Let me actually Google that. Okay, so there's a couple different languages. So maybe it's Arabic is the official language. So I'm gonna guess that he speaks Arabic. At one point at the end of the novel, Colonel Kithros just starts speaking Arabic to Ymir, and they say like with a good accent too. So that also just didn't make any sense to me, because maybe I've misinterpreted where he was stationed beforehand. But I was like, I'm right, he was stationed in Rwanda. They wouldn't speak Arabic in Rwanda. They would speak Kinyarwanda, English, and French. So it also doesn't make sense to me that he is fluent in Arabic for no reason, unless I'm wrong and that's where he was stationed. But also, like, most general military people don't, like, if he was a frontline person, he wouldn't really be, like, translators are different, and interpreters are often, okay, we're gonna just translate into things I don't like about this book, because I need to talk about, like, the bigger problems with the military in this book. This book tries to paint this, like, monolithic image of what military and soldiers are, and I have problems with it. It's not clear whether the soldiers that are like responding to and like helping clean up after these disasters are like Greek soldiers from the mainland, because it does say that Kithros like grew up in Greece, which also doesn't make sense where the Arabic comes in from, but that's another thing. Or if they're like UN, some sort of like national body soldiers. And this book seems to have this idea that like all soldiers are trained for war and trained for killing. I have family in the military, so this is something that like I run into a lot and that frustrates me a lot. I am not going to like ignore or like erase any of the like huge structural problems that come with bodies that have a great deal of power over people, things like the police, things like the military. We know that there are huge problems with those organizations, but they're not Like, you don't go to basic training and they hand you a gun and go, this is how you kill someone. Like, that's not how basic training, like, there's straight up a part in the book where they talk about, like, teaching you to, like, get rid of that human thing in you that tells you not to pull the trigger. And I'm like, nowhere in the military are they trying to do that. They want you to think twice before you shoot someone. It's frustrating to me because I'm like, I feel like this book is trying to complicate the issues and be like, you know, there's no black or white idea of morality. It's people who think they're helping are often like aren't helping, and you know, all the media coverage of like the Syrian refugee crisis that just went away so quickly. But then it like takes the military and makes them like this big monster bad guy that doesn't make any sense. And like, yeah, there's all sorts of problems with like hegemonic masculinity within the military, but I don't like the way that this book paints it doesn't make sense to me. Like, there's one character who lets them get away, and then they ask him, like, he says to him, like, oh, you know, nothing would get done in this world if like all men didn't have spines. And I'm like, okay, if we're gonna like court martial him for this, shouldn't you be court martialed for just like assaulting a civilian? It doesn't make sense. It is very nebulous. It doesn't follow any sort of like structure or knowledge that I have of a military understanding. So that's why I'm like, I don't understand where they're coming from. Also, like trying to think of Colonel Keithrose's history and like, does that make sense that he would be put in charge of this system? I don't really know. I also do want to acknowledge, like, I don't know a lot about what the actual recovery was like when those migrant ships crashed. Maybe the people that they did have working on that were all racists. Maybe I'm I'm the problem with trying to have a moralistic understanding of this novel. But also, it just didn't make sense to me that there was like no humanity in these characters, and they felt like ghoulish in their like violence and monstrosity. And I was like, that to me is not conducive to like an actual image of like what the military is or how it would function in modern society. Feel free to give me your thoughts on that, because I'm trying to always be aware when I'm engaging with literature, like what is my own internalization that like this book is asking me to challenge and work through, but also to be aware of the ways in which critiquing novels and being like, yeah, this doesn't make sense. So it's like a push and pull between the two, and I think there were some things in this book where I was trying to figure out like, is this a me thing or is this the novel thing? So I'd be curious to hear what other people thought about that. That was my like biggest critique of this book, and we'll get into the rest a little later on because I think it fits better in elsewhere. What I liked about this book, I think the one thing that I did like about this book, that it did well in some areas and bad in others, was that idea of blurring of morality. It very much asks it to question performative activism, and then as well, you know, particularly there's this conversation about like being the like white savior and this like idea that Westerns have of like helping, but only helping when it makes them feel better. Colonel Keithros has this quote where he says, "You're the temporary object of their fraudulent outrage, their fraudulent grief. They will march the streets on your behalf, they will write politicians on your behalf, they will cry on your behalf, but you are in the end nothing but a hook on which to hang the best possible image of themselves. Today you are the only boy in the world, and tomorrow it will be as though you never existed." And I do think a lot of this book is in response to the image of the young boy who washed up on a beach, who was a Syrian refugee, and unfortunately did not survive the trip, and the outrage that came out in the world about it, and then like slipped away within a couple months. You know, there's this idea of like the constant news cycle of like always needing something to feel better about yourself and protect your morality, but like not actually engaging in conversations about the issues, or like listening to the people who need help and like actually talking to them about it. And I think that is something that this book does well. I think sometimes it borders on like hopelessness for me, which I found like difficult, I think, just in the headspace that I am right now to like be able to engage with that story. But I do think it asks us to like question our very narrow view of the world. Like, this island has all sorts of hotels on it, and the tourists are like mad that the beach is getting shut down because another boat has washed up, or that their things are getting stolen, and there's no sense of, because people are human beings, and like I'm essentially like profiting off of the cheap travel trips because people are dying, and people don't want to come here because these people are dying, and not actively engaging and helping those people. I think that's something else that the book really critiques, like a white Western view of being the good guy and what that actually means, and how easy it is for us to be able to put blinders on that the people who are living it can't. The last thing I want to talk about with this book is the writing. So the writing in this book like has some bangers, like that line that I read, but I think my biggest problem with this book is that I didn't engage with the characters, and I think that was largely a fault of the writing. Because of that language barrier, it was very difficult writing in third person to have Vanna and Amir have conversations that helped build them as characters and helped me like empathize and really connect with them. I don't know if that was the intention of the author, but I do think it would have been a little bit clearer to have it in first person. I think that would have contradicted some of like the Amir getting lost in the narratives of everyone else on the ship in the before sections, and I think in the after sections going between Vanna and Amir's perspective in like first person would have been a better way to help us understand like what they're thinking and what's going on, because I genuinely didn't really get what Vanna's like motivations were in helping Amir, and it would have given me like a better window into what was going on in their minds. Maybe it would have helped me understand the Colonel too. Who knows? But I just think that that's something that, because there's so much like ideology and political conversation happening around like refugee crises, and it's something that we're seeing happen again in like the different treatments of refugees from Ukraine, from the way that Syrian refugees and other refugees have been treated, which is a whole nother conversation. And I think this book is trying to write into that narrative and like challenge it, but the like actual story of the book gets lost in trying to grapple with all that political ideology. To talk about whether the book connects us, because of this, I don't think that the book does a really good job of connecting us, because I didn't feel connected with the characters. I felt connected with the pain, and I think that that's something that the book does really well, you know, that sense of hopelessness and like wishing for a better tomorrow, to like not have it necessarily come true, or like be constantly beat down and treated terribly by this place you thought was going to be like a salvation or a second chance. That's something that the book does really well. But in order to like ground us to like the single humanity of these different people, or these faces of the people who are involved in it, I don't think the book does well. It speaks to more like a general morality and a humanity. So might be a win, might not be a win, depending how you perceive the question of does it connect us. I have rambled on for too long because I had a lot of complicated thoughts about this book. It's very weird doing the reviews this year because I feel like I have a lot more books that I didn't enjoy as well, where I think I enjoyed almost every book last year. So it's definitely interesting to think about that, and then like looking forward to the debates and seeing maybe these authors will change my opinion or allow me to look at the text in a different way, which will be really interesting. Tomorrow we will be talking about Washington Black, and then if I get my hands on the book on Friday, Life in the City of Dirty Water. I think I've requested that book from like every library in existence, so hopefully it gets here in time. But until then, if you have thoughts on this book, if you want to chat about anything that I've rambled about, I would be more than happy to hear. Feel free to leave a comment below. Make sure you like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell so you get notifications when the next ones come out. And I will see you all tomorrow. Till then, stay kind.